If you die tonight, I'll finally be free.
They thought he was gone. Machines breathed for him. His body lay still silent, powerless. But behind those closed eyes, Samuel Chanda was listening. The billionaire lay motionless on the hospital bed when his wife leaned close enough to whisper what she believed would never be heard. Her voice was calm, cold, relieved. No tears, no prayers, only truth. If you die tonight, she murmured, I'll finally be free. Inside that unmoving body, something shattered. A finger twitched, just once, unnoticed, and in that moment a man who had survived poverty, power, and success realized the most dangerous accident of his life wasn't the crash that put him there, but the woman standing beside him. Before we begin the story, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your country. And if stories like this move you, don't forget to subscribe, because some truths are only revealed when we think no one is listening. The accident happened just outside the city, where the smooth asphalt of privilege met the dust and danger of unfinished roads. Samuel Chanda had insisted on driving himself that evening. He had come straight from one of Chanda Group's construction sites. Boots, dusty shirt sleeves rolled up, mind heavy with numbers, deadlines, and the familiar pressure of being responsible for thousands of lives that depended on his decisions. The sun was sinking low, staining the Zambian sky in deep orange and purple, when a truck ahead of him swerved suddenly, its brakes screaming too late. Metal met metal, glass exploded, time fractured. Witnesses would later say the crash sounded like thunder tearing the road apart. By the time the sirens arrived, Samuel's luxury SUV was twisted beyond recognition. Blood streaked his forehead. His breathing was shallow. His eyes were closed, lashes resting unnaturally still against his skin. Paramedics worked fast, shouting instructions over the wail of alarms, fighting to keep the most powerful businessman in the region alive like any other fragile human being. Within minutes, the news spread. Samuel Chanda has been in a serious accident. Phones rang in boardrooms. Meetings were suspended. Workers on distant sites stopped mid-task. In homes across the city, people stared at television screens in disbelief. For many, Samuel was not just a billionaire. He was proof that someone born with nothing could rise without stepping on others. He paid fair wages. He visited sites personally. He remembered names. At the private hospital on the edge of the city, the atmosphere was tense and reverent, as if everyone felt they were standing on sacred ground. Doctors rushed Samuel into surgery. Hours passed. Outside the operating theater, Lucy Chanda arrived in a flood of cameras, tears already streaking her perfectly made-up face. She clutched her handbag like a lifeline, her knees trembling as she leaned into the arms of concerned friends and associates. "My husband," she sobbed, voice cracking just enough to sound real. "Please pray for my husband." The image was powerful. A devoted wife, a broken woman, a love story interrupted by fate. Inside the operating room, Samuel's heart stopped once. For 17 seconds, the machine screamed. Then it came back. When Dr. Nathan Wansa finally emerged, exhaustion lined his face. His white coat was stained, his shoulders heavy with the weight of what he was about to say. "We managed to stabilize him," the doctor announced quietly, "but Mr. Chanda has suffered severe trauma. There is swelling in the brain. He is currently in a deep coma." The words landed like stones. Lucy let out a cry and collapsed into a chair, her body shaking. Cameras captured the moment. Headlines were written before the night was over. "Billionaire Samuel Chanda fights for his life." What no headline could capture was what was happening beneath Samuel's still body. Because Samuel Chanda was not gone. He was trapped. Darkness surrounded him, thick and heavy. But somewhere beyond it, he could hear voices. Faint at first, then clearer. The rhythmic beep of a monitor. The soft hiss of oxygen, the pressure of bandages around his head. He tried to move his fingers. Nothing. Panic rose like fire in his chest, but his body refused to answer. He heard Dr. Mwansa's voice. Calm, professional, distant. No response to external stimuli. "We'll monitor closely." Samuel wanted to scream, but instead he listened. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into hours. Hours folded into something shapeless. Voices came and went. Some murmured prayers. Some spoke in hushed, respectful tones as if he were already gone. And then Lucy came. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor, confident, controlled. The sound alone told Samuel something was different now. When she spoke to the doctors, her voice was soft, trembling. "Can I see him?" she asked. Moments later, the room grew quiet. Lucy sat beside the bed. Samuel felt the dip of the mattress. Her perfume, expensive, floral, familiar, filled the air. For a brief, foolish moment, relief washed through him. She's here, he thought. I'm not alone. Her fingers brushed his hand. They were cold. You scared me, Samuel, she whispered. He waited for the warmth, the tears, the desperate plea for him to wake up. It didn't come. Instead, Lucy sighed a long, tired sound, heavy with something that was not fear. Do you know how long I've lived in your shadow? She continued softly, as if confiding in a secret. Always Samuel Chanda this, Samuel Chanda that. The great man, the perfect story. Samuel felt a crack open somewhere deep inside him. She leaned closer. I did everything right, Lucy said. I stood beside you, smiled, played my role. And now look at you. Her voice hardened. Lying here, silent, useless. If Samuel could have moved, he would have gasped, but his body betrayed him, forcing him to endure every word without reaction. Lucy stood abruptly, smoothing her dress. Her tone shifted again as nurses passed outside the room, sweet, worried, fragile. Oh, Samuel, she murmured loudly for any listening ears, please wake up. Then the door closed. That night, Nurse Thandiwe Moyo took the late shift. She moved with quiet grace, checking vitals, adjusting machines, speaking softly even though she believed her patient could not hear her. You're strong, she whispered while fixing Samuel's IV. People like you don't give up easily. Her words wrapped around him like a blanket. And that was when Samuel understood something terrifying and powerful all at once. He could hear, he could think, he could feel, but he could not move. And if Lucy believed he was truly unconscious, then the truth, her truth, would soon reveal itself. In the stillness of that hospital room, Samuel made a decision that would change everything. He would not wake up. Not yet. He would listen. He would watch. And when the time was right, the silence he was trapped in would become his greatest weapon. Outside the city slept unaware that a man everyone believed was helpless was quietly opening his eyes to the most dangerous reality of all. Not the accident, not the injuries, but the person he had trusted most. Morning came slowly to the private wing of the hospital, carried in on pale light that slipped through half-closed blinds. The machines around Samuel Chanda continued their steady work, counting seconds, measuring breaths, pretending life could be reduced to numbers on a screen. To the world, Samuel remained unconscious. Inside, his mind was wide awake. He learned the rhythm of the place, the soft shuffle of nurses changing shifts, the distant echo of footsteps in the corridor, the way doctors lowered their voices the moment they stepped into his room. He learned how time felt when you could not move, how every sound grew sharp, every word heavier than it should be. Most of all, he learned how people spoke when they believed a man could no longer hear. Lucy returned mid-morning dressed in black despite the heat, her sunglasses large enough to hide her eyes. The moment she stepped into the room, her posture changed. Her shoulders dropped. The performance paused. She stood over Samuel, studying his face like an object she no longer needed. So this is it, she said quietly. The mighty Samuel Chanda. There was no tenderness in her voice now, only assessment. She sat, crossed her legs, and checked her phone. Messages poured in, sympathy, concern, offers of help. She responded selectively, choosing words that painted her as the devoted wife holding her broken world together. Then she leaned closer to Samuel again. You know, she said almost conversationally, people think loving a powerful man is a blessing. They don't see the prison. Samuel felt each word press against him. I couldn't breathe without the world watching, Lucy continued. Every decision had to fit your image, your values, your legacy. She laughed softly, bitterly. And now look, one accident and it all stops. Samuel's chest tightened. He wanted to ask her when love had turned into resentment, when partnership had become competition. But his lips stayed still, betraying nothing. A nurse entered briefly, checking the monitors. Lucy's face transformed instantly, eyes glossy, voice trembling. Any change, she asked. The nurse shook her head. No response yet, ma'am. Lucy nodded solemnly, squeezing Samuel's hand just long enough to be seen. When the nurse left, Lucy released him, as if touching him burned. You always hated weakness, she said flatly. I wonder what you'd think of yourself now. She stood, straightened her dress, and walked out without looking back. From the corner of the room, Nurse Thandiwe Moyo watched the door close. She had been a nurse for over 10 years. She had seen families fall apart in these rooms, watched love reveal its true shape under pressure. Something about Lucy's visits unsettled her, not what she said aloud, but what she did not. Thandiwe approached Samuel's bed, her movements gentle. "I don't know if you can hear me," she murmured, adjusting his blanket, "but you're not alone here." Her voice was warm, steady, human. Samuel held onto it like a rope. Later that day, footsteps heavier than Lucy's echoed in the hallway. Elias Chanda entered the room, his face drawn with worry he made no attempt to hide. Unlike Lucy, he did not perform for the machines or the walls. He went straight to his brother's side and sat down heavily. Sam, Elias said quietly, clearing his throat. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm here." He rubbed his hands together nervously. "I keep thinking about that last call." He continued. "You said you'd tell me something important when you got back." Silence answered him. Elias sighed. "You always carried too much alone." "Maybe that's why none of us saw this coming." Lucy returned midway through Elias's visit, her expression tightening slightly when she saw him. "Elias," she said coolly, "I didn't expect to see you today." "I came to see my brother," Elias replied, his tone polite but firm. Lucy forced a smile. "Of course, we're all worried." Elias studied her carefully. There was something measured in his gaze now, something newly alert. "How are you holding up?" he asked. Lucy exhaled dramatically. "It's unbearable, the waiting, the uncertainty." Yet her eyes flicked briefly to her phone, to the notifications lighting up her screen. Elias noticed. "I've been reviewing some things at the office," he said casually, "just to keep things steady." Lucy stiffened. "Samuel didn't ask you to do that." "He didn't need to," Elias replied evenly. "I'm family." For a moment the air between them grew tense, stretched thin by unspoken suspicion. Lucy recovered first. "Well," she said lightly, "we all want what's best for Samuel." She reached for Samuel's hand again, this time holding it a little longer. "If he wakes up," she added almost thoughtfully. Samuel heard the words and felt something settle inside him. Not shock anymore, but clarity. Lucy left soon after, citing exhaustion. Elias lingered, sitting in silence, watching his brother's unmoving face. "You were always the strongest person I knew," Elias said softly. "If anyone can fight their way back from this, it's you." He stood to leave, pausing at the door. "And if someone is trying to take advantage of you while you're down," he added quietly, "they won't get far." Samuel wished he could smile. That evening, as the hospital grew quiet again, Lucy returned one last time. She believed the day had drained everyone's vigilance. She believed the truth was safest in the dark. She sat beside Samuel and leaned close, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've given enough of my life to waiting," she said. "If you don't wake up soon, I won't wait much longer." Her hand rested on his chest, not lovingly but possessively. Samuel's heart raced beneath her palm. He understood now. This was no moment of grief or confusion. This was calculation. This was impatience. And beneath the stillness of his body, Samuel Chanda made another promise to himself. He would survive this. Not just the accident, not just the injuries, but the truth. And when he finally opened his eyes, nothing would remain hidden. By the fourth day, the hospital no longer felt like a place of healing to Samuel Chanda. It felt like a courtroom where truth and lies took turns testifying, unaware that the judge lay silent on the bed. His body remained heavy, distant, as though it belonged to someone else, but his mind, sharp alert, cataloged everything, every footstep, every pause, every change in tone. That morning, Dr. Nathan Mwansa stood at the foot of the bed, clipboard in hand, speaking in measured phrases. "No significant neurological response yet," he said to the small group gathered. "We continue to monitor swelling. Recovery, if it comes, will take time." Lucy stood closest to the doctor, arms folded, nodding gravely. She had mastered the posture of concern, the slight tilt of her head, the faint crease between her brows. "How long is time, doctor?" she asked softly. Dr. Mwansa hesitated. "Days, weeks, possibly longer." Lucy exhaled slowly, as if absorbing the weight of sacrifice. "I understand," she said. "We'll do whatever is necessary." Samuel listened. He almost admired the precision of her performance. When the doctor left and the nurses dispersed, Lucy lingered. The room settled into a hush, broken only by the steady rhythm of machines. Lucy checked the door. Closed. She turned to Samuel. "You see," she said, her voice shedding its softness like an unnecessary coat, "even they don't know what to expect." She walked to the window, staring out at the city below. Cars moved on. People lived. Life continued. I used to imagine this place differently, Lucy continued. Hospitals. I thought they were places where people either fought to live or learned to let go. She glanced back at him. I didn't expect to feel relieved. The word struck Samuel like a blow. Lucy returned to the bedside and sat down slowly. Her movements were deliberate now, unhurried. There was no one left to convince. You were never cruel, Samuel, she said. That's the strangest part. You did everything right. You provided, you protected, you built an empire and still came home every night. She smiled faintly. But you never noticed how small I felt beside you. Samuel felt a ripple of confusion beneath the pain. When I walked into a room, Lucy continued, people didn't see me. They saw your wife, your shadow, your accessory. Her fingers tapped lightly against the bed rail. And I hated that she admitted. I hated that no matter how hard I tried, I could never be more important than your work, your legacy, your name. Samuel wanted to argue, to tell her how carefully he had balanced his world, how every late night had been for the future they shared, how he had believed stability was love. But silence held him hostage. Lucy leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. You know what scares me most? She asked quietly. Not losing you, losing time. She laughed softly, humorless. Time I spent being patient. Time I spent waiting for you to see me. Her gaze hardened. And now you're here, unable to speak, unable to stop me from finally choosing myself. She stood abruptly, agitation creeping into her movements. I won't be trapped again, Lucy said. Not by guilt, not by loyalty, not by a man who may never wake up. She paced the room once, then stopped at his side again. If you wake up tomorrow, she said coolly, we'll figure something out. Therapy, recovery, a slower life. Her lips pressed into a thin line. But if you don't, she shrugged lightly, then this is where our story ends. The door opened suddenly, and Nurse Thandiwe stepped in carrying fresh linens. Lucy's expression shifted instantly, eyes softening, shoulders sagging. I was just talking to him, she said gently. I know he can't hear me, but I believe it matters. Thandiwe nodded politely, though something in her eyes lingered on Lucy's face. I'll give you a moment, the nurse said. Lucy smiled gratefully, then leaned down and brushed Samuel's forehead with her lips. The kiss was light, practiced, and empty. As she left, Samuel felt something settle deep within him. Not despair, but resolve. That afternoon, Elias returned. He stood near the foot of the bed, hands in his pockets, studying his brother with a thoughtful frown. You look the same, he said quietly. Strong, stubborn. He pulled up a chair. I've been thinking a lot, Elias continued, about how quickly people change when power is uncertain. Samuel sensed what was coming before Elias said it. Lucy's been asking questions, Elias said, about the company, about shares, about authority. Elias shook his head slowly. She never cared about those things before. Samuel's heart beat harder. I don't want to accuse anyone unfairly, Elias added, but something feels wrong. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. If you can hear me, Sam, I need you to know this, I'm watching. And I won't let anyone dismantle what you built. For the first time since the accident, Samuel felt something like comfort. That night when the ward quieted and shadows stretched long across the walls, Lucy returned again. This time she did not sit. She stood over him, arms crossed, her silhouette sharp against the dim light. They're starting to ask questions, she said flatly. Your brother, the board. Everyone wants answers I don't have. She leaned closer, her voice low and edged with irritation. I didn't sign up to be a caretaker, Lucy snapped. I signed up for a life. She straightened and took a breath. I've given enough, she said, and I'm done pretending otherwise. Her gaze fixed on Samuel's closed eyes, searching for something, guilt perhaps, or fear. She found neither. Lucy turned away, heels clicking sharply as she left the room. Alone again, Samuel lay suspended between worlds, between the man he had been and the one he was becoming. He understood now that waking up too soon would end the story before the truth fully revealed itself. So he stayed still and waited. On the fifth day, the hospital wing smelled faintly of antiseptic and expensive flowers, bouquets delivered by people who wanted their names remembered, even if their hearts were absent. Cards stacked on the side table. Get well soon, Chairman. We are praying. Chanda Group needs you." But none of those words warmed Samuel Chanda the way a single quiet sentence from Nurse Thandiwe Moyo did. "You're still here," she whispered as she checked his pulse. "I can feel it." Thandiwe's hands were careful, respectful, as if Samuel were not a billionaire patient, but simply a human being entrusted to her. She adjusted his pillow, smoothed the blanket near his shoulders, then paused for a second longer than necessary, like someone listening for a reply that wasn't allowed to come. Across the hall, the shift changed. Footsteps came and went. A pair of junior nurses chatted in hushed voices. "They say his wife hasn't left the hospital," one murmured. "Yes, she's always here," the other replied. "Always, when cameras are around." Thandiwe didn't join the gossip. She didn't roll her eyes or smirk. She simply kept working her face calm. But her eyes sharpened each time Lucy entered the room, as if she were studying the smallest details the way a nurse studies a wound looking for what hides beneath the surface. Later that morning, Dr. Nathan Wansa arrived with two specialists. They spoke softly at the foot of Samuel's bed. "Minimal response," Dr. Wansa said, tapping the chart. "But there's stability. That is something." Lucy stood beside them, wearing a cream coat and an expression of devoted fatigue. She pressed her fingers to her lips as if holding back tears. "So there is hope," she said. "There is always hope." Dr. Wansa replied, careful not to promise what he could not control. Lucy nodded, then turned her attention to the specialists. "Is there anything more we can do?" she asked. "Any treatment? Anything that might wake him faster?" The question sounded tender, but beneath it lay a hunger. Samuel could feel even without seeing her eyes. The doctors left. The door clicked shut. Lucy exhaled long and impatient. "You heard them," she said to Samuel, voice dropping into that private tone she reserved for a man she believed could not hear. "Hope. Always hope." She gave a short laugh. "Hope doesn't pay bills, Samuel. Hope doesn't run companies." She checked her phone. A notification buzzed. Another and another. Lucy's thumb moved quickly, sending messages with the ease of someone managing more than grief. When Nurse Thandiwe stepped in to change Samuel's IV, Lucy's face softened instantly. "Thank you," Lucy said with a tremble. "Please, take good care of him." Thandiwe met her gaze politely. "That is my job, ma'am." Lucy smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "He's more than a job," she said. Thandiwe said nothing, but as Lucy swept out of the room, the nurse's expression shifted, quiet, thoughtful, almost sad. She leaned closer to Samuel as she worked. "Some people don't know how to hold love, Thandiwe." We murmured, voice barely audible. "They only know how to hold what love can give them." Samuel's chest tightened. If he had been able to cry, he would have. Instead, he drifted backward into memory, pulled by the softness in Thandiwe's voice. He remembered another woman's hands, Mama Ruth Chanda, not in a hospital, not in a mansion, but in a small home with cracked walls and a roof that sang when rain hit it. His mother's hands were rough from work, palms lined with hardship, yet when she touched him, it felt like the world could not harm him. Samuel was 8 years old in that memory, barefoot and thin, holding a school book with a torn cover. He had come home with tears stuck in his throat because other boys had laughed at him. "Your uniform looks like rags," they had said. "Your mother sells vegetables like a street woman." He had swallowed the shame until it turned sharp. Mama Ruth had looked at him, her eyes steady. "Come," she had said, sitting him down on a wooden stool. She had wiped his face with the corner of her wrapper and lifted his chin gently. "My son," she whispered, "do you know what makes a person rich?" Samuel, small and angry, had shaken his head. "Not money," Mama Ruth said. "Money comes and goes. Rich is what stays when money disappears." She pressed her hand over his chest. "Kindness stays," she told him. "Integrity stays. And God sees what people don't." Samuel remembered the smell of boiled maize in the kitchen, the distant sound of neighbors laughing, the warmth of his mother's presence even in poverty. That was the kind of love he had built his life around, quiet, sacrificial, solid. And now, lying trapped beneath this hospital blanket, he wondered when Lucy's love had stopped being that, or whether it ever had been. Thandiwe's voice pulled him back to the present. "I don't know what your story is," she said softly, replacing the IV tubing, "but I can tell you've fought before." She stood still for a moment, then added, "And I can tell you're not done." Down the corridor, the sound of heels clicked sharply. Lucy. She returned near evening, followed by a woman Samuel recognized by voice alone, Aisha Ndlovu, one of Lucy's closest society friends. Aisha laughed easily, like someone who had never worried about how to pay rent. "Oh, Lucy." Aisha said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "This must be so hard." Lucy made a small, controlled sound. "It is." The two women stepped into the room, and Samuel sensed Lucy's posture shift again, becoming the polished wife in front of company. Aisha approached the bed and stared at Samuel for a second too long. "He looks peaceful," Aisha murmured. Lucy's laugh was quiet and bitter. "Peaceful isn't helpful." Aisha lowered her voice. "Have they said anything about, arrangements?" Lucy's silence lasted half a second too long. "I'm handling it," she said. Aisha's tone grew sly. "And the company, the accounts, all of it." Lucy cut her off with a sharp glance, then looked toward the door as if remembering where they were. "Not here," Lucy said quickly. She stepped closer to the bed, lowering her voice even further. "We'll talk later." Aisha nodded, but her curiosity didn't fade. Before leaving, Aisha leaned toward Samuel and said softly, almost like a joke, "Don't take too long, Mr. Chanda. People move fast when a throne is empty." Lucy's lips tightened. She escorted Aisha out, but Samuel could feel the irritation radiating from her like heat. Minutes later, Elias arrived. His presence was different from Lucy's. No perfume, no performance, no restless phone tapping. Just quiet loyalty and eyes that looked tired from sleepless nights. He sat close to Samuel, leaning forward. "I spoke to Advocate Peter Kalume." "Elias," said, voice low. "He told me Lucy asked to review certain documents." Samuel's heart pounded. Elias exhaled, his jaw tightening. "I didn't want to believe it, Sam, but she's acting like a woman preparing for an ending." He fell silent, then whispered, "And I'm starting to think she's not waiting for fate." Elias stood pacing once, then returned to the bedside. "If you can hear me," he said, voice thick, "I need you to hold on, not for the company, not for the money." He swallowed hard. "For your own dignity." Samuel wanted to reach for his brother's hand to tell him he wasn't alone, but the paralysis held him. That night, when the wing quieted and the city lights blinked in the distance, Lucy returned one more time. She didn't know Thandiwe had stepped into the hallway and paused, listening, still silent, unnoticed. Lucy stood over Samuel, her voice low and sharp. "I'm tired of this," she hissed. "Everyone wants me to be strong, but nobody asks what I want. Nobody cares what I sacrificed." She leaned closer. "You always thought you were saving people," she said, "but you never saved me." There was a pause. Then Lucy's voice softened, dangerously calm. "If you don't wake up soon," she murmured, "I'll make sure this ends, one way or another." In the corridor, Nurse Thandiwe's breath caught. Inside the room, Samuel's mind screamed. And in that moment, Thandiwe understood what everyone else hadn't. This wasn't just a marriage cracking under tragedy. This was something darker, something urgent. And Samuel Chanda, trapped behind closed eyes, was running out of time. The sixth day began with rain. It fell softly at first, tapping against the tall glass windows of the private hospital wing, then grew heavier, washing the city in gray. Samuel Chanda listened to it the way a prisoner listens to footsteps, measuring time by sound, counting the spaces between moments. Rain had always calmed him. Today, it sharpened him. Lucy arrived earlier than usual. There were no cameras trailing her this time, no dramatic pauses at the entrance. She moved with purpose, her heels striking the floor with clipped precision, as if she had somewhere else she would rather be. She didn't greet Samuel. She didn't sit. She went straight to the window, pulled the curtain back slightly, and stared out at the rain-soaked city. "They're watching me," she said abruptly, breaking the silence. "Everyone is watching me." Samuel felt the words land like stones. "The board, your brother, even the staff." Lucy continued, "They smile, but I can feel it. They're waiting, measuring how long I stay loyal." She turned toward the bed, her expression hard. "I won't be tested like this." She reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. Samuel heard the familiar tone as she placed a call, her voice shifting into something lighter, more intimate. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'm at the hospital." A pause. "No, he's the same." Another pause, longer this time. "I know," Lucy replied, lowering her voice. "But things are moving too slowly. I can't wait forever." Samuel's heart raced. He recognized that tone. He had heard it once before, years ago, when Lucy had spoken about opportunity, about knowing when to act. She turned away from the bed as she continued the call. "You promised," she said sharply. "You said once he was out of the picture, everything would be easier." The rain outside intensified, thunder rolling faintly in the distance. I don't care how, Lucy whispered. I just need this resolved. Her grip tightened around the phone. Yes, she said after a pause. Tonight. She ended the call and stood still for a moment, breathing deeply as if steadying herself. Then she turned back to Samuel. If you can hear me, she said flatly, this is the part where everything changes. She left without another word. Samuel's thoughts raced. His body remained useless, unresponsive. The decision he had made to stay silent to listen suddenly felt dangerous. For the first time since the accident, fear crept in cold and real. Not fear of death, fear of betrayal carried to its final conclusion. Minutes later, Nurse Thandui entered, her movements slower than usual, her expression troubled. She checked Samuel's vitals, then hesitated, glancing toward the door as if making sure they were alone. Someone just asked about changing your medication schedule, she said softly. Someone who shouldn't be making that request. Samuel felt a spike of alarm. Thandui leaned closer, lowering her voice. I didn't authorize anything, she continued, and neither did Dr. Mwansa. Her eyes searched Samuel's face, looking for something, anything. I don't know what's happening, she admitted, but I promise you this, I won't let anyone touch what they don't understand. She straightened and moved to the door, locking it discreetly. That small click echoed louder than thunder in Samuel's mind. Later that afternoon, Elias arrived, rain clinging to his jacket, his face drawn with concern. I just got off the phone with Peter Kalume, he said, pacing the room. Lucy requested an emergency review of Samuel's medical authority, his hands clenched into fists. She wants to be able to make unilateral decisions. Elias continued, decisions that should involve the board, or me. He stopped pacing and stood beside Samuel. This isn't normal, Elias said quietly. This isn't grief. He leaned closer. If you can hear me, Sam, he whispered, you need to wake up soon. I don't trust what's coming next. Samuel wanted to shout, I know. He wanted to scream, stop her. But the silence wrapped around him like chains. That evening, the hospital lights dimmed, casting long shadows across the corridor. The rain finally slowed, leaving behind a thick, uneasy stillness. Lucy returned after visiting hours. No announcement, no hesitation. She wore a dark coat, her hair pulled back tightly, her face set with determination rather than sorrow. She closed the door behind her and stood there for a moment, listening. You always hated confrontation, she said finally. You preferred plans, systems, control. She stepped closer to the bed. I learned from you, Lucy continued. I just learned faster. She reached for Samuel's wrist, not to comfort him, but to feel the pulse beneath his skin. You're strong, she said. But strength doesn't matter if you can't use it. There was a knock at the door. Lucy stiffened. Nurse Thandui's voice came from outside. Mrs. Chanda, Dr. Mwansa asked me to inform you that no changes to Mr. Chanda's care will be made tonight. Lucy's jaw tightened. I didn't request any changes. There was a pause. Yes, you did? Thandui replied calmly. But the answer is no. Lucy exhaled sharply and stepped away from the bed. We'll talk later, she called back. The door opened briefly, then closed again. Lucy turned back to Samuel, her eyes blazing. This is exactly what I mean, she hissed. Everyone thinks they know what's best for you. She leaned close, her face inches from his. But they don't know you like I do. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And they don't know what I'm willing to do. She straightened and walked out, her footsteps echoing down the hall like a warning. Moments later, Thandui returned, her expression composed, but her hands trembling slightly. I've increased security on your room, she whispered, and I've spoken to Dr. Mwansa. She paused, then added, if you're listening, you need to hold on. Just a little longer. As night settled in, Samuel lay suspended between paralysis and urgency. The danger was no longer subtle. Lucy's impatience had sharpened into something reckless. The rain began again, light but persistent, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the hospital walls, plans were moving, plans that no longer assumed Samuel Chanda would wake up at all. By the seventh day, the hospital no longer felt neutral. It felt divided. There were people who entered Samuel Chanda's room with care, soft footsteps, lowered voices, eyes that lingered with concern. And then there were those who entered with purpose, with calculation behind their smiles, as if the room itself were a waiting vault. Elias Chanda noticed the difference more clearly than anyone else. He arrived early that morning before Lucy, before the board members, who now visited in careful rotation. He stood near the window, watching the city wake up beneath a pale sky, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. Something is off, he said quietly, not expecting an answer. And it's getting worse. He turned toward his brother's bed, studying Samuel's still face. The swelling had gone down slightly. The lines of pain were softer now. If Elias didn't know better, he might have thought Samuel was simply sleeping. But sleep didn't explain the tension in the room. I checked the access logs last night, Elias continued. Someone tried to override hospital protocol, twice. He shook his head. They didn't get far, but the attempt alone. His voice trailed off. Samuel heard every word, his heart pounding beneath the steady rhythm of machines. Elias was closer now. Danger was no longer just a feeling, it had footprints. Lucy arrived an hour later, flanked by Advocate Peter Kalume. She walked with confidence, her expression composed, her grief perfectly restrained. But Elias saw the flicker of annoyance in her eyes when she realized he was already there. Elias, Lucy said coolly. You're here early. I could say the same, he replied. Lucy smiled faintly. I'm his wife. And I'm his brother. Elias said evenly. We're both allowed. Peter Kalume cleared his throat, stepping forward. We need to discuss a few urgent matters. Lucy nodded. Yes. Samuel's condition has made certain responsibilities. Unclear. Elias folded his arms. Unclear doesn't mean available. Lucy's eyes hardened for half a second before softening again. I'm just trying to keep things from falling apart, she said. The company needs leadership. Decisions can't wait forever. And neither can Samuel, Elias replied. He's still alive. Lucy inhaled sharply, then let the breath out slowly. Alive isn't the same as present, she said. You know that. Samuel felt something twist painfully in his chest. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Their cruelty lay in how easily they were spoken. Peter shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps we should step outside. No, Elias interrupted. If there's something to say it here. Lucy stared at him, then nodded once. Fine, she said. I want temporary authority over certain operational matters. Until Samuel recovers. And if he doesn't? Elias asked. Lucy's gaze flicked briefly to Samuel's face. Then we adapt, she said. The silence that followed was thick. Elias stepped closer to the bed, placing a hand gently on the railing. My brother didn't build his life on convenience, he said, and he didn't marry someone who gives up when things get hard. Lucy's lips trembled, not with sadness but with anger. You don't know what it's like, she snapped, to live beside a man who belongs to everyone. Elias met her gaze steadily. I know what it's like to love him. Lucy looked away. The meeting ended without resolution. Peter Kalume promised to review legal boundaries. Lucy left first, her heels sharp against the floor, her jaw tight. As soon as the door closed, Elias leaned closer to Samuel. I don't trust her, he whispered, and neither does Peter, no matter how carefully he speaks. He swallowed. I need you to wake up Sam, or at least, give me something. Samuel wanted to give him everything. That afternoon, Nurse Thandui noticed something subtle but alarming. Samuel's heart rate spiked briefly when Lucy's name was mentioned outside the room, not enough to trigger alarms, just enough to notice. Thandui frowned, checking the monitors again. She leaned in close, speaking softly. You heard that, didn't you? She murmured. Samuel did not move, but his pulse slowed only after her voice faded. Thandui straightened slowly, a realization forming behind her eyes. Later, Lucy returned alone. This time she locked the door behind her. Her movements were tense, sharp, stripped of patience. They're turning against me, she said angrily. Your brother thinks he's clever. Your nurse thinks she's important. She scoffed. Everyone suddenly has an opinion. She paced the room, running a hand through her hair. I stood by you, Lucy said. I built this image with you, and now they want to push me aside like I'm nothing. She stopped beside the bed, gripping the rail tightly. I won't be erased, she whispered, not by your silence. Samuel felt a chill spread through him. Lucy leaned down, her voice low and trembling, not with fear but with frustration. I need this to end, she said, one way or another. She straightened abruptly as footsteps sounded outside. Lucy unlocked the door just as Thandui stepped in. Mrs. Chanda, the nurse, said calmly, though her eyes were alert. Visiting hours are over. Lucy forced a smile. I'm leaving. She brushed past Thandui without another word. Thandui stood still for a moment, then moved quickly to Samuel's side. She checked his vitals, then lowered her voice. Listen to me, she whispered urgently. I don't know how, but I know you can hear. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the sheet. You're not safe, Thandui said. Not the way things are going. She paused, steadying herself. I've asked Dr. Mwansa to authorize continuous monitoring, and I've documented everything. She leaned closer. If something happens, she whispered, there will be a record. That night, Elias returned again, his face drawn tight with worry. She tried to pressure Peter again, he said quietly. He refused. Elias ran a hand over his face. She's running out of patience. He sat beside Samuel, his voice dropping. If you're waiting for the perfect moment, he said, be careful. Sometimes silence gives people permission. Samuel felt the truth of that sentence like a blade. As the lights dimmed and the ward settled into uneasy quiet, Lucy made one final appearance, this time watched carefully by security stationed discreetly down the hall. She entered Samuel's room with a measured calm. She stood over him for a long moment, studying his face as if memorizing it. You always thought you were in control, she said softly. But control is an illusion. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the hallway. They won't let me near you much longer, Lucy continued. They're protecting you. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. But protection doesn't last forever. She reached out and brushed his hand lightly briefly. For what it's worth, she said, this isn't how I imagined it ending. Then she turned and walked out. Behind closed eyes, Samuel Chanda made a decision. The listening phase was over. The waiting was becoming dangerous, and very soon silence would no longer be enough. Night settled heavily over the hospital, thick and unmoving, as if the building itself were holding its breath. The 7th day faded into the 8th without ceremony. No announcement, no turning point anyone could see. But inside Samuel Chanda, something shifted. He no longer floated in uncertainty. He was awake to danger. The ward lights dimmed at 10 sharp. Footsteps thinned, conversations softened into murmurs. The kind of quiet that invites secrets wrapped itself around the private wing. Samuel listened to the rhythm of the place security guards pacing the corridor, the faint hum of the elevator, the whisper of distant rain returning like a warning. Lucy arrived after midnight. She moved carefully this time, her heels silent, her coat dark, her hair pulled back tight. She paused outside Samuel's door, glanced down the corridor, then slipped inside and closed it gently behind her. She didn't turn on the light. Instead, she stood there in the half-dark, watching him. Samuel felt her presence before she spoke. The air changed when Lucy was near, charged, restless. They think I don't notice, she said quietly. Your nurse, your brother, the guards. She let out a soft laugh that held no humor. They think I'm weak. She walked slowly toward the bed, her silhouette breaking the faint glow from the city lights outside. I built this life with you, Lucy continued, and now everyone acts like I'm a threat. She stopped beside him, folding her arms. Do you know what hurts the most, she asked, that they believe you need protection from me? Samuel's heart beat harder, his chest tight beneath the sheet. Lucy leaned forward, resting her hands on the bed rail. They don't understand what it's like, she whispered, to spend years loving a man the world owns. She sighed long and heavy. I gave up my dreams for you, Lucy said. My freedom, my youth. Her voice hardened. And now I'm supposed to wait quietly while everyone else decides my future, she straightened suddenly, agitation breaking through her control. No, Lucy said sharply. I won't wait. She pulled out her phone, her fingers moving quickly. Samuel recognized the tone in her voice when the call connected, low, urgent, intimate. I told you it couldn't drag on like this, she said. They're interfering. A pause. Yes, Lucy continued. Tonight would have been easier, but they're watching. Another pause, longer this time. I don't care, Lucy snapped softly. I need a guarantee. Thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Samuel listened helpless as pieces aligned in his mind. This was no longer impatience. This was planning. Lucy ended the call and stood there, breathing hard. If you wake up tomorrow, she said flatly, everything changes. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper so intimate it chilled him. And if you don't, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Lucy stepped back, glanced at the door, then slipped out as quietly as she had entered. The room felt colder without her. Moments later, Nurse Thandiwe entered, her face pale, her eyes alert. She locked the door behind her and moved quickly to Samuel's side. I heard her, Thandiwe whispered. Samuel's pulse jumped. I wasn't trying to, she added, but she wasn't careful. Thandiwe checked the monitors, her movements quick and precise. She's talking to someone, Thandiwe said. Someone dangerous. Her voice trembled slightly before steadying. I've escalated everything to Dr. Mwansa and to security. She leaned closer, her face inches from Samuel's. If you're still waiting... Thandiwe said softly, you may not have much time left. Samuel wanted to answer her, to blink, to move a finger, anything. Nothing came. Minutes passed, then the door opened again. Elias. He stepped inside, quietly closing the door behind him. His face was tense, his eyes dark with exhaustion and worry. She just left, Elias said. Lucy. Thandiwe nodded. I know. Elias moved to Samuel's bedside, lowering his voice. I spoke to Peter, he said. Lucy's been asking about medical proxies again. His jaw tightened. She wants final authority. Thandiwe crossed her arms. That can't happen. Elias looked at her. She's pushing hard. He leaned closer to Samuel. I don't know how much longer we can contain this, Elias whispered. If you're waiting for the right moment, brother. His voice broke. Don't wait too long. Elias stepped back, rubbing his face. I've increased security, and I'm staying here tonight. He looked at Thandiwe. You too. She nodded. I won't leave. The night stretched on, heavy and slow. Around 3 a.m, Samuel's thoughts drifted not to fear but to memory. He remembered the day he married Lucy. She had stood barefoot on red earth, smiling through tears, her hands trembling as she held his. There had been no cameras then, no empire, just promise. You see me? She had whispered to him. Not the money, not the future. He had believed her. Now, lying here, trapped inside his own body, Samuel understood something painful. Love that depends on control is not love, it is ownership. Around dawn, Lucy returned. This time security stopped her. I'm his wife, Lucy said sharply. And we have orders, the guard replied calmly. Lucy's eyes burned with fury. Orders from who? From Dr. Mwansa and Mr. Elias Chanda, the guard said. Lucy laughed bitterly. So now I need permission to see my own husband. She turned away, pulling out her phone, her voice low and furious as she spoke to someone Samuel couldn't hear. Thandiwe watched from the doorway, her heart pounding. Inside the room, Samuel lay still, but his mind raced. The line had been crossed. Lucy was no longer hiding, and Samuel realized something else, something that chilled him more than her threats. If he woke up now, she would deny everything. If he waited too long, she might make sure he never woke up at all. As the first light of morning crept into the room, Samuel focused inward with everything he had. He imagined his mother's voice, his brother's hand, Thandiwe's steady presence. He tried to move, a finger, a toe, anything. Nothing responded, but something deep inside him, something stubborn, forged in years of struggle, refused to surrender. The machines continued their steady song. To everyone else, Samuel Chanda remained unconscious, but inside, he was preparing. Because the next words Lucy spoke, words he would soon hear, would change everything, and when the truth finally surfaced, it would not be gentle. The morning of the 9th day arrived with a brittle calm, the kind that settles just before something breaks. Sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, painting pale lines across Samuel Chanda's motionless face. To anyone watching, he looked unchanged, still quiet, suspended between worlds. But inside him, the waiting had become unbearable. He could feel the tension tightening around him like a rope. Lucy arrived just after 8. This time she did not bother with sorrow. Her face was composed, sharp, her movements efficient. She was dressed not like a grieving wife, but like a woman going to claim something that already belonged to her. She was not alone. Advocate Peter Kalumi followed her into the room, his briefcase clutched firmly in his hand. His expression was professional, cautious, but there was unease beneath it. Samuel could hear it in the way Peter cleared his throat before speaking. Good morning, Mrs. Chanda, Peter said carefully. Lucy nodded. Let's not waste time. She gestured toward Samuel's bed, then to the chair beside it. Sit. Peter hesitated before doing so. Lucy turned her gaze to Samuel, studying his face as though confirming something to herself. 9 days, she said coolly. 9 days of nothing. She looked back at Peter. The board is restless. Peter shifted. They are concerned about continuity. And so am I, Lucy replied, which is why we need to move forward. She reached into her handbag and placed a folder on the small table beside the bed. These are the documents we discussed, Lucy said. Temporary authority, medical proxy, operational control. Peter opened the folder, slowly scanning the pages. Samuel listened intently, his heart pounding harder with every turn of paper. This is extensive, Peter said quietly. Lucy crossed her arms. It's necessary. Peter glanced at Samuel, then back at Lucy. You understand that Mr. Chanda is still alive? Lucy's eyes flashed. Barely. The word cut deep. He could recover? Peter said cautiously. Lucy let out a dry laugh. And if he doesn't? Peter said nothing. Lucy leaned forward, lowering her voice. I've waited, she said. I've prayed. I've cried. I've done everything a good wife is expected to do. Her tone hardened. Now it's time to be practical. Samuel wanted to scream. Peter closed the folder slowly. I can't approve this without medical confirmation that he is incapable of decision-making. Lucy's jaw tightened. He's in a coma. Yes, Peter replied, but protocol matters. Lucy's patience snapped. Protocol, she repeated sharply. My husband is lying here unable to speak, and you're worried about protocol. She paced the room once, then stopped abruptly. What if I told you, Lucy said quietly, that there are people already preparing to take advantage of this delay? Peter stiffened. Who? Lucy smiled thinly. People who don't care about Samuel or his legacy. Peter studied her carefully now. I won't be rushed into something that could be challenged later, he said firmly, especially not under pressure. Lucy stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once. Fine, she said. We'll do this the long way. She gathered the folder and slipped it back into her bag. But don't misunderstand me, Peter, Lucy added softly. This is happening, with or without your help. Peter stood uncomfortable. I suggest we revisit this after speaking with Dr. Mwansa. Lucy waved him off. Do what you need to do. Peter left quickly, relief evident in his retreating footsteps. Lucy remained. The room felt heavier with her alone. She turned back to Samuel, her eyes cold. You see, she said, even now they hesitate. She leaned close, her voice dropping. They don't understand what's at stake. Samuel felt her presence like a weight pressing down on him. I built this image with you, Lucy continued. I stood beside you while you rose. And now that you're down, she straightened, her tone sharpening. I won't fall with you. The door opened again. Elias. He took in the scene instantly, the tension, Lucy's rigid posture, Samuel's still body. What's going on? Elias asked. Lucy turned, her expression carefully neutral. Business, she said. Elias moved closer to the bed, his eyes never leaving Lucy. I heard voices, he said. I heard Peter left. Lucy shrugged. He's cautious. Or concerned, Elias replied. He looked down at Samuel, his jaw tightening. You're pushing too hard, Elias said quietly. Lucy laughed bitterly. You don't get to tell me how to grieve. This isn't grief, Elias shot back. This is ambition. Lucy's face darkened. You think you know my intentions? She snapped. You think you're protecting him? Elias met her gaze steadily. I know you're trying to control everything before he can stop you. Silence fell like a slap. Lucy's eyes flicked briefly to Samuel's face, then back to Elias. He can't stop anything, she said flatly. Elias took a step closer. As long as he's breathing, you don't get to decide that. Lucy scoffed. Breathing isn't living. Elias inhaled sharply. Get out. Lucy stared at him, stunned. Excuse me. You heard me? Elias said, his voice firm. This conversation is over. For a moment, Lucy looked as if she might explode. Then she smiled, a thin, dangerous curve of her lips. You're making a mistake, she said softly. She turned to leave, stopping briefly at Samuel's bedside. I hope you wake up. Lucy murmured, her voice almost gentle. I really do. Then she walked out. Elias stood frozen for a moment, then sagged into the chair beside Samuel. She's losing control, he whispered. And that makes her dangerous. Nurse Thandiwe entered shortly after, her eyes moving quickly between Elias and Samuel. I heard raised voices, she said. Elias nodded. She's escalating. Thandiwe swallowed. So am I. She leaned closer to Samuel, her voice low but steady. I've documented everything she said, the calls, the requests, the pressure. She looked at Elias. If anything happens, there will be a trail. Elias nodded gratefully. As the afternoon wore on, Lucy did not return, but Samuel felt her absence like the quiet before a storm. Inside his unmoving body, a truth burned clear and sharp. Lucy was no longer waiting for fate, she was trying to create it, and Samuel Chanda knew with terrifying certainty that the next move would force him to choose, remain silent or finally open his eyes. The 10th day began without ceremony, but it carried a different weight. Samuel Chanda felt it the moment consciousness settled into him, like a blade being drawn slowly from its sheath. His body was still heavy, still distant, but something had changed. The fog that once dulled his thoughts had thinned. Sounds were sharper, time felt closer, and danger felt immediate. Nurse Thandiwe Moyo arrived just before sunrise. She moved quietly, efficiently, but her eyes never left Samuel's face for long. She checked the monitors, adjusted his blanket, then paused long enough to notice it. A change. Samuel's breathing had shifted, not enough to alert alarms, just enough to feel intentional. Thandiwe leaned closer, her heart racing. "Mr. Chanda," she whispered. Samuel focused with everything he had. His fingers were useless. His lips refused him. But somewhere deep inside, he pushed. And this time his eyelids fluttered. Just once. So slight it could have been missed by anyone who wasn't watching closely. Thandiwe froze. Her breath caught, then steadied as training took over. She checked the monitors again. Normal. She looked back at Samuel's face. Nothing. She leaned closer, lowering her voice until it barely existed. "If that was you," she murmured, "don't do it again." Samuel heard her. Understood. Thandiwe straightened slowly, her mind racing. She finished her tasks, then left the room calmly as if nothing had happened. In the corridor, she exhaled shakily and pulled out her phone. She didn't call Lucy. She called Dr. Nathan Mwansa. "I need you here," she said quietly. "Now." Dr. Mwansa arrived within the hour, his expression serious as he reviewed Samuel's chart. "You noticed something?" he asked. "Yes," Thandiwe replied, "and I'm not mistaken." Dr. Mwansa stepped into the room, studying Samuel closely. "Mr. Chanda," he said calmly, leaning in. "If you can hear me, don't respond. Just listen." Samuel listened. "There are complications around you," the doctor continued. "People making requests they shouldn't." He paused deliberately. "If you are aware," Dr. Mwansa said, "staying still may be the safest thing for now." Samuel felt something close to relief. Dr. Mwansa straightened and turned to Thandiwe. "Increase monitoring, discreetly, and limit access." Thandiwe nodded. "Already done." That afternoon, Elias returned, his face etched with exhaustion. "I had a meeting with the board," he said quietly, sitting beside Samuel. Lucy tried to push for interim control again. His jaw tightened. "She's not hiding anymore." Samuel's pulse quickened. Elias leaned closer. "They're resisting for now, but pressure is building." He rubbed his temples. "If this drags on, she might find another way." Samuel understood exactly what he meant. That evening, Lucy returned. Security allowed her in under strict supervision. She smiled politely at the guards, but her eyes were sharp, restless. Inside the room, she closed the door behind her and turned to Samuel with a long, assessing look. "You look different," she said slowly. Samuel held his breath internally, willing his body to remain still. Lucy stepped closer, studying his face like a puzzle. "The doctor said there's been no change," she continued, "but I know you." She reached out, brushing his cheek lightly. "You always were stubborn." Samuel felt the urge to pull away, but he couldn't. Lucy's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, irritation flashing across her face. "They're watching me," she muttered. "Your nurse, your brother." She sighed, straightening. "This isn't going the way it should," Lucy said, "and I don't like losing control." She leaned closer again, lowering her voice. "I need certainty, Samuel," she whispered, "one way or another." Her hand rested briefly on his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath. "You're still fighting," she said quietly. "I can feel it." Samuel forced himself into stillness. Lucy pulled back, her expression tightening. "Fine," she said. "We'll do this carefully." She turned and left without another word. Outside the room, Thandiwe watched her go, unease coiling tighter in her chest. That night, the hospital felt too quiet. Around midnight, a subtle alarm chimed at the nurse's station, an attempt to access Samuel's medication records, unauthorized. Thandiwe's heart skipped. She moved quickly, alerting Dr. Mwansa and security. Access was blocked within seconds, but the message was clear. Someone was trying to change something. Thandiwe returned to Samuel's room. Her movements controlled but urgent. "They tried again," she whispered. "They didn't succeed." She leaned close, her voice steady. "You're not imagining this. Neither am I." Samuel wanted to tell her everything, to warn her how close the danger felt. Instead, he focused again, pushing inward. This time, his fingers twitched, just slightly. Thandiwe's breath caught again. She didn't react outwardly. She didn't smile. She didn't gasp, she simply whispered, "I see you." That small acknowledgement felt like oxygen. Later, Elias arrived, summoned quietly by Thandiwe. She tried to override the system, Thandiwe told him in hushed tones. Again. Elias swore under his breath, "She's desperate. She's dangerous." Thandiwe replied. Elias looked at Samuel, his eyes shining with something between fear and hope. "You're coming back," he said softly. "I know it." He leaned closer. "But listen to me, if you wake up now, she'll lie. She'll deny everything." Samuel knew. "And if you wait too long," Elias continued, voice breaking slightly, "she might not give you the chance." The truth settled heavily between them. Samuel lay still, weighing everything. He understood now that waking up was not just about survival, it was about timing. About catching the truth in the act, about ensuring there would be witnesses when the mask finally fell. The night stretched on. Lucy did not return, but her presence lingered like a shadow just beyond the door. Inside his silent body, Samuel made a final decision. He would wake up. But not yet. Not until there was no escape left for the truth. The 11th day arrived with a tension so thick, it felt like the hospital itself was holding its breath. Samuel Chanda lay motionless, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. To anyone watching, nothing had changed, but inside him everything was sharpened to a single point. He was no longer just listening. He was waiting. The morning passed quietly, too quietly. No visits, no voices hovering at his bedside. Even the machines seemed subdued, their beeps softer, more deliberate. Nurse Thandiwe noticed it immediately, the unnatural calm, the way danger sometimes disguised itself as peace. She checked the hallway. Security was present, but thinner than usual. At noon, Elias arrived, his face pale, his movements restless. "She hasn't shown up today," he said quietly. "Lucy." Thandiwe nodded. "That worries me more than if she had." Elias leaned against the wall, rubbing his temples. "Peter called me earlier. Lucy canceled a scheduled meeting with the board." "That doesn't sound like her," Thandiwe said. "No," Elias replied grimly. "It sounds like someone changing strategy." Samuel felt a chill ripple through him. By late afternoon, clouds gathered again outside, dark and heavy. The sky pressed low over the city as if warning of what was coming. Lucy returned after sunset. This time she wasn't alone. Security at the end of the corridor noticed them but didn't intervene. Lucy walked calmly, confidently, accompanied by a man Samuel had never seen but instantly recognized by voice alone. Victor Banda. He spoke softly, his tone smooth, calculated. "I told you," Victor murmured as they approached the room. "This needs to be clean." Lucy stopped just outside the door. "It will be." They stepped inside together. The door closed. Samuel's heart began to race. Victor stood near the door, his posture relaxed but alert, eyes scanning the room like a man assessing risks. Lucy moved toward the bed, slowly, deliberately, her gaze locked on Samuel's face. She studied him for a long moment. Still, nothing she said. Victor crossed his arms. "You're sure?" Lucy nodded. "I've watched him for days. He hasn't moved." Samuel forced his mind into stillness, pushing down the instinct to react. Victor stepped closer, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You said there were complications," he said, "that people were interfering." Lucy scoffed. "They're trying, but they can't stop everything." She glanced at the machines, then back at Victor. "I just need this resolved," she said, "once and for all." Victor hesitated. "This isn't what we discussed." Lucy turned on him sharply. "You said you'd help." "I said I'd wait," Victor replied. "There's a difference." Lucy's jaw clenched. "Waiting costs me everything." She stepped closer to Samuel, lowering her voice. "He built this life," she said, "and now it's holding me hostage." Victor watched her carefully. "You're talking about a man who might still wake up." Lucy laughed softly without humor. "He won't." Samuel felt the weight of her certainty like a knife. Lucy reached for the IV stand, her fingers brushing against the tubing, not disconnecting it, not yet, just touching it. "Accidents happen," she said quietly, "even in hospitals." Victor stiffened. "That's not what I agreed to." Lucy turned to face him fully now, her eyes burning. "You agreed to freedom," she said. "This is the price." Victor opened his mouth to argue, but the door opened suddenly. Nurse Thandiwe stood there. "What's going on here?" she asked calmly, though her heart was pounding. Lucy spun around instantly, her expression transforming. "I asked Victor to keep me company," she said sweetly. "I didn't want to be alone." Thandiwe's gaze moved to Victor, then to Lucy, then briefly to the IV stand. Visiting hours had ended long ago. I'll need you both to step outside, Thandiwe said evenly. This area is restricted. Lucy smiled. Of course. She stepped away from the bed without protest, brushing past Thandiwe. Victor followed, but as he passed Samuel's bed, his eyes lingered on Samuel's face for half a second too long. Samuel felt it. Victor wasn't convinced. Once they were in the corridor, Thandiwe locked the door and moved quickly to Samuel's side. They shouldn't have been here, she whispered. I'm calling security. She stepped out briefly, speaking urgently to the guards. When she returned, her face was pale but determined. They won't be back tonight, she said. Samuel felt a wave of relief, but it didn't last. An hour later, Elias arrived breathless. She's furious, he said. Lucy, security escorted them out. Thandiwe nodded. I documented everything. Elias ran a hand through his hair. That man with her, Victor, he's bad news. Samuel's thoughts raced. Lucy wasn't just losing patience, she was unraveling. The night deepened. The rain returned, drumming against the windows in sharp, insistent bursts. Just before midnight, Lucy came back again, alone. She stood outside the room, arguing quietly with security. I'm his wife, she said. You can't keep me away? Doctor's orders, the guard replied. Limited access. Lucy's voice dropped dangerously low. You'll regret this. She turned away abruptly, pulling out her phone. Inside the room, Samuel felt the shift before it happened. The air tightened. Minutes later, an alarm chimed softly, a medication alert. Thandiwe froze. She rushed to the console, eyes scanning the screen. A new request had been entered. Override attempt. Her heart pounded as she canceled it instantly. She's trying again, Thandiwe whispered. Elias clenched his fists. She won't stop. Thandiwe looked at Samuel, her eyes shining with urgency. This can't go on, she said softly. She's escalating too fast. Samuel listened, his mind racing. He had wanted to wait until everything was undeniable, but Lucy was no longer waiting for denial. She was pushing toward a point of no return. And for the first time since the accident, Samuel realized something terrifying and clear. If he stayed silent much longer, Lucy would destroy herself and possibly him with her desperation. The time was coming. Soon, very soon, he would have to open his eyes, not as a patient, but as a witness. The 12th day dawned with a sharp, unforgiving clarity. Samuel Chanda felt it before he heard it, the shift in the air, the tightening of resolve inside him. The line he had been approaching for days was now directly beneath his feet. One more step in either direction would change everything. He lay still as dawn light crept across the ceiling, listening to the hospital wake up. Carts rolled, doors opened and closed. A guard cleared his throat outside. Somewhere down the corridor, a phone rang and rang until it stopped. Nurse Thandiwe arrived early. Her face composed, but her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. They tried again at 2:14 a.m., she whispered as she checked Samuel's vitals. Different credentials, same target. Samuel's pulse quickened. They're not just testing limits anymore, Thandiwe continued. They're looking for a gap. She adjusted the IV, then leaned closer, her voice steady but urgent. Dr. Mwansa is coming, and so is Advocate Peter. Elias too. Samuel understood. This was the moment when everything would be set in place. Dr. Nathan Mwansa entered first, his presence calm and authoritative. He reviewed the charts, studied the logs, and then carefully spoke as if the walls themselves might be listening. Mr. Chanda, he said softly, if you can hear me, I need you to remain exactly as you are. Samuel listened. There will be a meeting today, Dr. Mwansa continued. Here, in this room, with witnesses. He paused, choosing his words. It's time for the truth to have nowhere left to hide. Elias arrived shortly after, his face drawn tight with worry and determination. He gripped Samuel's hand gently, his voice low. She's demanding a formal review, Elias said. Lucy. She wants the board present, doctors, lawyers. His jaw clenched. She thinks she can force a conclusion. Samuel felt the irony settle heavily inside him. Advocate Peter Kalum entered last, closing the door carefully behind him. I've reviewed the logs, Peter said quietly. The override attempts, the pressure, the timing. He looked at Dr. Mwansa. This is no longer ambiguous. Dr. Mwansa nodded. Agreed. Peter turned toward Samuel's bed, lowering his voice. Mr. Chanda, he said, if you are aware, this meeting will be decisive. Samuel's thoughts raced. He had wanted witnesses. He had wanted records. He had wanted the truth exposed under light so bright it could not be denied. Now it was coming. Lucy arrived precisely at 10. She entered the room with confidence, dressed sharply, her expression controlled. She was followed by two board members Samuel recognized by voice, a hospital administrator, and Victor Banda. Victor's presence sent a chill through Samuel's mind. Lucy stopped at the foot of the bed, surveying the room with thinly veiled irritation. So she said, "We're all here." Dr. Mwansa stood firm. "This is a clinical and legal review, Mrs. Chanda." Lucy smiled politely. "Of course." She stepped closer to Samuel, resting a hand lightly on the rail. 9 days ago, Lucy said calmly, "My husband suffered a devastating accident. He remains unresponsive. The company needs leadership. Decisions cannot wait." Elias stiffened. "You're moving too fast." Lucy turned to him sharply. "And you're holding everything hostage with hope." Peter raised a hand. "We'll proceed one at a time." Lucy nodded. "Fine." She faced the room. "I'm requesting immediate authority over medical decisions and interim control of Chanda Group," Lucy said. "This is practical, necessary." Victor stood quietly near the wall, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. Dr. Mwansa spoke next. "Before any authority is transferred, we must address repeated unauthorized attempts to alter Mr. Chanda's care." Lucy's expression flickered. "I don't know what you're implying," she said coolly. Thandiwe stepped forward, her voice steady. "I documented every attempt," she said. "Times, credentials, locations." Lucy's eyes snapped toward her. "You're overstepping." Peter cleared his throat. "The records are clear." Lucy laughed softly. "So now I'm being accused." Elias stepped closer. "You brought a man into his room after hours. You pressured staff. You tried to override safeguards." Lucy's composure cracked for half a second. "I was desperate," she said sharply. "That doesn't make me guilty." Victor shifted his eyes, flicking briefly to Lucy. "Mrs. Chanda." Peter said carefully, "We also have reason to believe financial decisions were being prepared, contingent on—" "Enough," Lucy snapped. "You're all circling me like vultures." She turned toward Samuel, her voice dropping intimate. "Samuel," she said, "if you can hear me, wake up and end this." Samuel felt the room hold its breath. Silence. Lucy's lips tightened. "You see," she said, turning back to the others. "Nothing." Dr. Mwansa took a step forward. "We're not finished." Lucy laughed bitterly. "What more do you want?" "A miracle." For the first time, Victor spoke. "This is getting out of hand," he said quietly. Lucy spun toward him. "Stay out of it." Victor met her gaze evenly. "You asked me to help you get certainty. This isn't certainty." Lucy's eyes burned. "You promised." "I promised to wait," Victor replied. "Not to destroy yourself." The room went still. Lucy stared at him, betrayal flashing across her face. Samuel felt the moment sharpen. This was it. He gathered everything he had, every memory of his mother's voice, every lesson of patience, every warning he had ignored. He pushed inward harder than he ever had. His fingers twitched. Thandiwe gasped softly. Lucy froze. Samuel's eyelids fluttered. Then slowly, deliberately, his eyes opened. The room erupted into chaos. Samuel Elias breathed. Lucy staggered back a step, her face draining of color. Dr. Mwansa moved instantly to Samuel's side. "Easy," he said calmly. "Don't move." Samuel's gaze focused. It found Elias first, then Thandiwe, then Peter. Finally it settled on Lucy. He did not speak yet. He didn't need to, because Lucy was already unraveling. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her confidence shattered into panic. You're awake," she whispered. Samuel's eyes never left hers, and in that silence, heavy, unbreakable, Lucy realized something too late. He hadn't just woken up. He had heard everything. Silence fell like a wall. For a long moment after Samuel Chanda opened his eyes, no one spoke. The machines continued their steady rhythm, indifferent to the fact that everything in that room had just changed. Lucy was the first to move. She took a small step backward, then another, as if the space between her and the bed had suddenly become dangerous. Her face, moments ago so controlled, was now stripped bare, panic flashing through the cracks she could no longer hide. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice thin. You're awake." Samuel did not answer immediately. His throat felt dry, his body weak, but his mind was clear, clearer than it had been in years. He let his gaze move slowly around the room, taking in every face. Elias' eyes wet with relief. Nurse Thandiwe, hands pressed together, breathing shallowly. Dr. Mwansa already checking monitors, Advocate Peter Kalum standing rigid as if afraid to move, Victor Banda frozen near the wall, his confident mask slipping. Only then did Samuel look back at Lucy. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "I'm awake." The sound of his voice hit the room like a shockwave. Lucy's knees buckled slightly and she grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "Thank God," she said quickly, the words tumbling out too fast. "Samuel, thank God. We've been so worried." "Stop," Samuel said quietly. The single word cut through her performance with surgical precision. Lucy froze. Samuel swallowed, forcing strength into his voice. "Before you say anything else," he continued, "I need everyone here to listen." Dr. Mwansa glanced at Peter, then nodded. "Go on, Samuel. Take your time." Samuel took a slow breath. Every word mattered now. "For days," he said, "you all believed I was unconscious." Lucy's fingers tightened around the chair, but I wasn't. Samuel continued. "I heard everything." The room seemed to tilt. Lucy shook her head immediately. "That's not possible," she said, a brittle laugh escaping her. "You were in a coma. The doctors said I heard you." Samuel said again, his eyes never leaving hers. "Every visit, every whisper, every phone call you thought I couldn't hear." Lucy's mouth opened, then closed. Elias sucked in a sharp breath. Thandiwee's eyes filled with tears. Samuel turned his head slightly toward the others. "I heard about the documents, the proxies, the pressure." Peter stiffened. "Samuel." And I heard Samuel continued, his voice growing steadier, "what my wife said when she thought she was alone with me." Lucy's face drained completely of color. Samuel looked back at her. "You said," he continued slowly, deliberately, "if you die tonight, I'll finally be free." The words echoed in the room, heavy and undeniable. Lucy staggered backward as if struck. "That's a lie," she cried. "You're twisting things I heard you tell Victor." Samuel went on that accidents happen, even in hospitals. Victor flinched, his eyes snapping to Lucy. "You said he couldn't hear," he muttered. "You said he was gone." Lucy spun toward him. "Shut up." Dr. Mwansa stepped forward sharply. "That's enough." Samuel's voice cut in again, calm but lethal. "I heard you complain about waiting, about being trapped, about how breathing isn't living." Lucy's lips trembled violently now. "And I heard Samuel said how you tried repeatedly to change my medication, to gain control before I could stop you." Lucy's composure collapsed. She dropped to her knees beside the bed, clutching the rail. "Samuel." "Please," she sobbed. "You don't understand. I was scared. I was alone. I thought I was losing everything." Samuel watched her, his expression unreadable. "You weren't scared of losing me," he said quietly. "You were scared of losing control." Lucy shook her head frantically. "That's not true. I loved you. I love you." Samuel let the words sit in the air. "Love," he said finally, "does not sound like relief at the thought of my death." The room remained silent, every witness holding their breath. Victor shifted uneasily. "Samuel," he said, trying to sound composed, "I didn't know how far this was going." "I swear." Samuel's gaze flicked to him. "You knew enough." Victor opened his mouth, then closed it again. Advocate Peter Kalum stepped forward. "Samuel," he said carefully, "everything you're saying, it's all on record now." Samuel nodded. "Good." Lucy looked up at him, desperation flooding her face. "Please," she whispered, "we can fix this. I'll do anything." Samuel leaned back against the pillow, exhaustion finally catching up to him. "I don't want revenge," he said softly. "I want truth." He turned his head slightly toward Peter. "Proceed." Peter inhaled deeply. "Given what has been revealed," he said, "all requests made by Mrs. Lucy Chanda are nullified, effective immediately." Lucy gasped. "You can't!" And Peter continued, "Pending further investigation. Her access to medical and corporate authority is suspended." Lucy screamed, then a raw, broken sound. "Samuel, don't do this to me." Samuel closed his eyes briefly, not in pain, but in grief. "You did this to yourself," he said. Dr. Mwansa stepped in, his tone firm. "Mrs. Chanda, I'm asking you to leave now." Lucy stared at Samuel one last time, her eyes wild, searching for something, mercy perhaps. She found none. Security moved in quietly, respectfully, but with finality. As Lucy was escorted out, her cries echoed down the corridor, growing fainter with every step. The door closed. The room exhaled. Elias moved quickly to Samuel's side, gripping his hand tightly. "You're back," he whispered. "You're really back." Thandiwe stepped forward, tears streaming freely now. "You're safe," she said softly. Samuel looked at her and nodded. Because of you. He turned his gaze to the ceiling, the weight of everything finally settling. The mask had fallen. The truth had spoken. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. The aftermath did not arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, painfully, like debris settling after an explosion. In the hours after Lucy was escorted out of the hospital wing, Samuel Chanda lay awake for the first time without pretending. His body ached in ways no one could see. Muscles burned from disuse. His throat felt raw every time he spoke. But none of that compared to the deeper exhaustion, the kind that comes when betrayal finally stops being a suspicion and becomes a fact. Dr. Mwansa insisted on rest, but Samuel asked everyone to stay a little longer. Not Lucy, everyone else. Elias sat beside him, still holding his hand like he might disappear if he let go. Advocate Peter Kalume stood near the window, phone in hand, already fielding calls. Nurse Thandiwe remained quietly at the foot of the bed, as if guarding the room itself. "She's asking to see you," Peter said carefully after ending one call. Samuel closed his eyes briefly. "No," Peter nodded. "Security has been instructed." Outside the hospital, news traveled fast, too fast. Word spread through the boardrooms and offices of Chanda Group that Samuel was awake, alive, a miracle. But whispers followed closely behind whispers about Lucy, about security involvement, about lawyers. The image Lucy had worked so hard to protect began to fracture. By the next morning, she had lost access to the hospital entirely. Lucy spent that night in her car. She had driven without direction, her hands shaking on the steering wheel, replaying the moment Samuel opened his eyes over and over again. In every version in her head, he stayed silent. He stayed weak. He forgave her. Reality was crueler. Her phone buzzed constantly. Friends, associates, people who had once called her strong and graceful. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Every ring felt like judgment. Victor Banda was the only person she called. "You said this wouldn't happen," she snapped the moment he answered. There was a pause on the other end. "I said you were rushing," Victor replied coolly. "You said he wouldn't wake up. I said we should wait." Victor corrected. "You stopped listening." Lucy laughed bitterly. "So that's it. You're abandoning me too." "I'm protecting myself," Victor said. "You should do the same." The line went dead. Lucy stared at the phone, her reflection staring back at her through the dark windshield eyes, red face, drawn a stranger wearing her skin. For the first time since Samuel's accident, she felt something close to fear. Not fear of loss, fear of consequence. Back at the hospital, Samuel began the slow process of reclaiming himself. Doctors ran tests, therapists came and went. Every movement required effort. Every step forward reminded him how close he had come to losing everything, not just his life, but his truth. Elias stayed constantly sleeping in a chair, refusing to leave. "You don't have to guard me anymore," Samuel said softly one afternoon. Elias shook his head. "I'm not guarding. I'm staying." Peter returned with updates, his voice professional but heavy. "Lucy's accounts are being reviewed," he said. "The board has frozen her access pending investigation." Samuel nodded. "Good. And Victor Banda has retained counsel." Peter added. "He's distancing himself." Samuel gave a faint, tired smile. "Of course he is." The hardest conversations were not about money or control. They were about memory. Late one evening, when the ward was quiet, Samuel asked Thandiwe to stay for a moment. She hesitated. "I don't want to intrude." "You didn't?" Samuel said. "You protected me." She sat, hands folded tightly in her lap. "I need to ask you something." Samuel continued. "Why didn't you look away?" Thandiwe swallowed. "Because I've seen what happens when people do." She met his gaze. "And because you reminded me of my father. He trusted the wrong people too." Samuel nodded slowly. "Thank you." For days, Lucy tried to reach him. She sent messages. She left voicemails, some angry, some apologetic, some so fractured they barely made sense. "I was scared." "You left me alone. We can fix this." "I didn't mean it." Samuel listened to none of them. When she finally requested a formal meeting through her lawyer, Samuel agreed. Not for reconciliation, for closure. They met in a private room at the hospital, guarded, witness controlled. Lucy entered carefully, her confidence gone. She looked smaller now, stripped of performance, her eyes darting around the room. Samuel sat upright in his bed, supported by pillows, his face calm but distant. They stared at each other in silence. Lucy broke first. I never wanted it to be like this, she whispered. Samuel studied her quietly. Then why did it become this? Lucy's voice cracked. I felt invisible. Samuel nodded slowly. And you chose to make me disappear instead. She flinched. I didn't think you'd hear, she said weakly. That Samuel replied is the problem. Tears streamed down Lucy's face, now unchecked. I loved you, she insisted. I just lost myself. Samuel's voice was steady. Love doesn't erase conscience. Lucy reached for his hand. Samuel did not pull away, but he did not hold her either. This marriage is over, he said gently. Not because you failed me once, but because you failed me when I was most vulnerable. Lucy sobbed openly. Please don't ruin me. Samuel met her eyes. I won't ruin you. He paused. But I won't save you either. The meeting ended shortly after. Lucy left the hospital not in handcuffs but in disgrace. The media turned quickly. Stories shifted. Sympathy faded. Questions grew louder. Invitations stopped coming. Doors closed quietly but firmly. Lucy Chanda, once admired, became a cautionary tale whispered behind closed doors. Samuel, meanwhile, began to heal, not just physically but morally. He returned to the boardroom weeks later in a wheelchair, thinner, quieter, but unmistakably present. The room stood when he entered. I'm not here to punish, Samuel told them. I'm here to rebuild. He restructured the company, tightened safeguards, promoted those who had shown integrity when power was uncertain. He thanked Elias publicly. He honored Thandui privately. And one evening, alone in his recovery room, Samuel allowed himself to finally grieve not the accident, but the illusion he had lived inside. He had survived the crash, but more importantly, he had survived the truth. Healing is never a straight road. For Samuel Chanda, recovery came in layers first, the body, then the mind, then the places inside the heart that had been bruised so deeply he didn't know they existed until they ached. By the time the doctors cleared him to leave the hospital, he could walk slowly with a cane. His steps were careful, measured like a man learning how to trust the ground again. Outside the hospital gates, the city looked the same: traffic, street vendors, people laughing and arguing, life moving forward. But Samuel was not the same. Elias helped him into the car, closing the door with a gentleness that made Samuel swallow hard. You're really going home, Elias said, trying to sound light. Samuel nodded, staring ahead. Home, he repeated quietly, as if testing whether the words still fit. The mansion gates opened. Security saluted. Staff stood in a line, some with tears in their eyes, others smiling with honest relief. Lucy had once called this place a prison. To Samuel, it had always been a shelter built from years of discipline and sacrifice. Now it felt like a museum of memories, beautiful, expensive, and full of ghosts. Samuel didn't go to the master bedroom. He couldn't. Instead, he chose a smaller guest room overlooking the garden. The first night, he sat by the window for a long time, watching the moonlight fall on the leaves, listening to the quiet. In the silence, his mind tried to replay the words Lucy had spoken when she believed he was powerless. But Samuel stopped it, not because it didn't hurt, because he refused to let betrayal be the final voice in his head. The next morning, he returned to the Chanda Group headquarters. He did not arrive with fireworks. No loud press conference, no dramatic speeches, just a man stepping out of a car, leaning on a cane, meeting the eyes of the workers waiting outside. Some of them clasped their hands to their mouths, others bowed their heads. A few shouted his name, and the sound, raw, emotional, hit Samuel unexpectedly. He raised his hand once, a quiet gesture of acknowledgement. Inside, the boardroom felt colder than he remembered. Members of the board rose when he entered. Files were stacked neatly. Bottled water was lined up. The air smelled like polished wood and nervousness. Samuel sat at the head of the table, Elias to his right, Advocate Peter Kalum to his left. For a moment he said nothing. He simply looked around the room, letting everyone feel the weight of his presence. Then he spoke. I didn't come back to punish. Samuel, said, his voice steady. I came back to protect what matters. A murmur rippled through the table. Samuel continued, an empire is not bricks and contracts. It is trust. And trust must be guarded the same way we guard money. He turned slightly toward Peter. Report. Peter adjusted his glasses. Access restrictions remain in place. Unauthorized override attempts have been traced and documented. Several internal accounts were compromised by external coordination. Samuel didn't need names to know where it led. I want safeguards strengthened, Samuel said. Not because I fear betrayal, because I understand human weakness. He looked directly at Mr. Collins Tembo, one of the board members known for opportunism. "If anyone here believes my absence gives them permission to become reckless," Samuel said calmly, "I suggest you correct that belief." Collins swallowed hard and nodded. Samuel then turned to Elias. "From today," Samuel announced, "Elias Chanda will oversee operational continuity whenever I am unable to." Elias's eyes widened. "Samuel." Samuel lifted a hand. "You earned it." The room fell silent, and in that silence, Samuel felt something he hadn't felt in days: stability. Later that week, Samuel made another decision. He invited Nurse Thandiwe Moyo to the headquarters, not for publicity, not for ceremony, but for gratitude that deserved to be seen. When Thandiwe arrived, she looked out of place in her simple uniform, standing among polished suits and marble floors. She held her hands together, nervous. Samuel walked toward her slowly, cane tapping softly against the floor. Thandiwe lowered her head respectfully. "Sir, don't," Samuel said gently. "Not here, not like that." He paused, looking at her with quiet seriousness. "You didn't just do your job," Samuel said. "You protected a man you didn't owe anything to." Thandiwe swallowed. "I did what was right." Samuel nodded. "That's rarer than people think." He offered her an envelope. Thandiwe's eyes widened. "Sir, I can't." "It's not charity," Samuel said firmly. "It's acknowledgement." Inside was a scholarship fund support for Thandiwe's professional advancement and a financial gift for her family. Not because Samuel wanted to save her, but because he respected her. Thandiwe's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Samuel nodded once. "Thank you." And in the weeks that followed, Samuel began to rebuild something even more important than his company: his life. Lucy disappeared from his days in the way a storm disappears after it has torn through a town, leaving damage and silence in its wake. There were no late-night calls anymore, no messages, no visits. Sometimes Samuel heard her name in the background of conversations, whispers about where she had moved, who had stopped answering her calls. How quickly society forgets a person once the lights go out. Samuel didn't ask. He didn't need the details. He had given her closure. Now he chose peace. One evening he visited the small neighborhood where he grew up. The streets were narrower than he remembered. The air smelled of charcoal smoke and cooking oil. Children ran barefoot, laughing their joy, untouched by wealth. Samuel stepped out of the car, slowly feeling eyes on him. People recognized him, but they didn't rush him. They watched with quiet respect. He walked to an old corner stall and bought a bottle of water from an elderly woman. She stared at him for a long moment, then smiled. "God returned you," she said simply. Samuel felt his throat tighten. Maybe he replied. As he turned to leave, a young boy approached timidly, eyes wide. "Sir," the boy whispered, "is it true you almost died?" Samuel crouched carefully, wincing slightly but keeping his face calm. "Yes," he said. The boy swallowed. "What did you learn?" Samuel looked into the child's eyes and answered honestly. "That money can't protect your heart," he said, "but truth can." He stood and walked back to his car, carrying that simple sentence with him like a compass. Back at home, Samuel sat again by the garden window where moonlight painted the leaves silver. He was still healing, still rebuilding, but now he knew what mattered most. Not the applause, not the image, not the perfect story. The people who stay when you are powerless, the people who choose what is right even when nobody is watching, and the courage to face the truth, no matter how much it costs. Life doesn't always test us when we are strong. Sometimes it waits until we are silent, weak, and unable to defend ourselves. Samuel's story reminds us of a truth many people learn too late. Power reveals character, but vulnerability exposes it completely. When everything was taken from him, his voice, his movement, his authority, what remained was not money or status, but the people and values he had built his life on. This story is not just about betrayal. It is about discernment, about understanding that love without conscience becomes possession and ambition without integrity becomes destruction. Lucy did not fall because she lacked opportunity. She fell because she chose control over compassion, speed over patience, self over truth. But this story is also about hope. It shows us that goodness still exists in quiet places, in a nurse who refuses to look away, in a brother who stands firm when silence would be easier, and a man who chooses truth over revenge when he has every reason to retaliate. Real strength is not shouting. It is waiting. It is observing. It is choosing dignity when bitterness feels justified. And perhaps the deepest lesson of all is this: how people treat you when you can give them nothing tells you everything you need to know. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What part of Samuel's journey moved you the most? Have you ever discovered someone's true nature during a moment of weakness or crisis? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. And if stories like this touch your heart, inspire reflection, and remind you of the value of truth and humanity, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. More stories are coming, stories that remind us who we are and who we should never become.